All right, doing part two. As promised, I have a cameo from Beam Boy. He might jump in every once in a while if he feels like it, but he's, as you can tell, not super happy about being picked up to the table. So I'm gonna let him go over. Come on, buddy. Oh, you mad at me for picking you up? He is not like being picked up. But all right, let's go to the actual review. Share screen, going over. All right. Done with that, day one. We get to scroll past those whole 2 pages, knowing that we did that. All right, starting up with our amendments. Now, we did this one in class. You guys went through and I gave you answers, but I'm also doing this for people that missed class, didn't have the opportunity for that. So we're still going to go through it. If you were there, skip this. So amendments, we're going to go through and we're going to put the number amendment that matches up with the statement here. Now, these can be any of the 27 amendments that show up in this, and they can be in any order. There's no real rhyme or reason to it other than the majority of these are important amendments. There is one of them specifically that when we get to it, I'll tell you that it's not important and it doesn't matter. You don't need to remember it, but first one's first, a student wearing an armband to protest the Vietnam War. Now remember, this is Tinker versus Des Moines. We should have talked about this with the Vietnam War. They're protesting that, part of the anti-war movement. They're wearing those black armbands with the peace sign on it as a symbol of solidarity with the anti-war movement, right? They get suspended for it. They say, hey, that is a violation of my First Amendment, right? You are allowed to protest at school as long as that protest does not disrupt the learning process, is basically what the Supreme Court comes to on that one. If you are not disrupting the learning process, you are allowed to have your First Amendment right. Voting without having to pay a poll tax. This was a big part of the civil rights movement, right? This is a way not only to keep people of color out of the voting booth, but it kept all people of lower classes out of the voting booth, right? If you don't have enough money to pay to vote, not allowed to. And it doesn't even have to be that large of a charge if you think about it. Now in the modern day, when it's free to vote, we still have low voter turnout, right? So imagine if you added a charge on top of that you had to pay for it, right? So this is just a way to keep people out of those voting booths. How do we get rid of it in the civil rights movement? Well, if you remember some of your timeline, you should know by the time we get into the civil rights movement, we're at least into the 20s on our amendments. This one is the 24th Amendment. Joseph McCarthy being elected as Senator of Wisconsin. This one's a little tricky. You got to think through it. What is McCarthy? A senator. They're talking about him being elected as senator. Well, what amendment has to do with the election of senators? That's what you got to think about. Which one has to do with the election of senators? Well, in my class, we talked about tax-paying senators, drunken wives voting, right? 16, 17, 18, 19 on the amendments. Tax-paying senators, drunken wives vote. The second one in that one being senators, which should be the 17th Amendment, talking about the direct election of U.S. senators. So that one's going to be 17 on there. Well, we just answered basically number 4, right? Getting alcohol from a speakeasy. Why would I have to go to a speakeasy to get alcohol? Well, that might be because of prohibition that outlawed alcohol, right? Speakeasy being those underground secret bars. You see them in TVs and movies sometime, right? Where they give a password and they knock on the door and you got to know it to get in and everything, right? So you go to a speakeasy because of prohibition, the 18th Amendment. Here's another fun way to remember 18 being prohibition, right? What age are you legally considered an adult? Well, you're legally considered adult at 18, but what can you not do? drink, can't drink at 18. The second part of that makes it easier to remember is the 21st Amendment gets rid of prohibition. So at 18, you can't drink, prohibition. At 21, you can, the amendment that repeals prohibition. Little way to remember those two. Gave men like Booker T. Washington the right to vote. Well, we know that men from the beginning of the United States could vote, right? So what amendment would give men like Booker T. Washington the right to vote? They're obviously getting at something there by saying men like Booker T. Washington. Well, we know there is an amendment that allows people of color to vote, and there's an amendment that allows women to be able to vote. Well, we get men like Booker T. Washington, so it should just be the amendment that allows people of color to vote would be the one for him. That is the 15th Amendment. Easy way to remember that one. Right over here are hints: free citizens vote, 13, 14, 15, free, 13, citizens, 14, vote, 15. The right to vote cannot be abridged or denied on the basis of race. Susan B. Anthony was an avid advocate for this right. So we know Susan B. Anthony was a big women's rights advocate. We just talked about probably the most important amendment for women directly, right? The ability to vote. That one is, if we remember our tax-paying senators' drunken wives vote, that is 19 wives voting, right? So why schools have a moment of silence versus spoken prayer. Now, this one's a little tricky because students don't remember this part of this amendment very often. But what is the only amendment that mentions religion directly? The first should be what you're thinking of, right? Now, you might be thinking, well, the First Amendment is freedom of religion. Why would I be told I can't pray in school if it's supposed to be freedom of religion? Well, you got to think about how they outlined freedom in that, right? You have the freedom to practice any religion, which makes it where the government cannot designate a dominant religion, right? The supremacy clause makes it where we cannot have one government religion. Because think about it, how hard would it be to practice some of those other religions if there was a government recognized religion, right? And they kind of learned the lesson from Britain doing that when King Henry decided to create his own branch of the church, right? He wanted to have his divorce, right? So he made the Church of England, and it was the official church of the state. And there's been the history of Protestants and Catholics straight up killing each other throughout Europe and all of those problems because of religious persecution. We have people fleeing to the United States because of that religious persecution. So they don't want to have one religion become the dominant one enforced by the government. So we can't have government sponsored religion unless we do all of them. And then if we do anything in every religion for the prayer time, it's going to get the whole day, right? If you're doing every religion possible. So first Civil War Amendment. So the amendments that get passed right after the Civil War. Well, we already talked about that. Free citizens vote. Which amendment frees all enslaved people? That is the 13th Amendment. Outlaws the practice of slavery outside of punishment for a crime, right? Now, old enough to fight, old enough to vote. If I'm old enough to be drafted into the military, sent out to fight and die for my country, maybe I should get a say in what that country is doing, right? Maybe I should be able to vote my officials into office, right? So on that one, That's during which war do you think has the biggest anti-war movement, has the most people getting upset about being drafted and all of that, to where maybe we'd push for a new amendment to be able to vote on whether or not we're even in that war? The Vietnam War, right? That's the one with our biggest anti-war movement. And that is the 26th Amendment that lowers the voting age. It actually used to be 21, lowers it from 21 to 18. So governments must provide reasonable compensation when taking over a person's property. Now, a lot of students, when they hear this one, they hear, oh, government taking your property. I know that one about unreasonable search and seizure. The government can't seize your property. So that is the Fourth Amendment. No, because they're talking about compensating you for taking your property, right? The Fourth Amendment deals with criminal investigations, right? Police forces taking your property in an investigation or some manner like that, right? This one is talking about if the government wants to use your property for something, they have the right to take it. And they have to compensate you for it if they take it, though, right? That is eminent domain, right? For example, you own a farm. Well, that farmland is the perfect place for a highway to be built straight through it, right? So the government says, hey, this is a public good. We're creating a highway for everyone to use. It's going to be really convenient and helpful, right? So we're going to take your land. Now, you might not be happy about it, but unfortunately, through an eminent domain, they have the right to take it, right? But you get a payday for it. They have to compensate you fairly for that land, according to eminent domain. That is the Fifth Amendment. A lot of stuff in the Fifth Amendment. Fifth Amendment's pretty broad. Moving on. This is the one that doesn't matter. U.S. senators can only vote for a raise that will take place in the next term. It's the 27th Amendment. You can cross that line out. That will never come up. I'll give everybody a free 100 on the project. Non-binding. I'm being facetious, but seriously, it's not going to show up on the STAAR test. That amendment does not matter for you guys. IRS collects income tax every April 15th. Well, what was our little saying to get 16, 17, 18, 19 tax paying senators, drunken wives vote? 16 is tax, income tax, right? So that is going to be the 16th Amendment. When testifying as a witness, you refuse to answer some questions and thus incriminate yourself, right? So when you plead the what to keep from incriminating yourself, you see it in movies and TV all the time. Again, when somebody's being real difficult in a police interrogation, they keep going, I plead the Fifth Amendment gives you the right against self-incrimination, right? You can't be forced to admit to a crime or say something that would implicate you in a crime. Had this been in effect, Roosevelt's presidency would have ended during the Great Depression. Now, Roosevelt goes on to be president through World War II, right? Almost to the very end. He dies in office during his fourth term, right? Which amendment makes it where it's two terms? 22. 2 terms, 22. Right? Super easy way to remember that. 2 terms, 22. I do that. It's sign language for 22. 2. The state of Texas has the power to make laws concerning the sale and transport of alcohol. This one's tricky. There are 2 correct answers to this one, actually. I accepted 2 answers to this one. The first one that's a little bit more direct, that is what it's kind of getting at with the alcohol laws, is again, which amendment gets rid of prohibition, makes it where you can drink again. Well, what age can you drink at? 21, 21st Amendment, right? So you can put down the 21st Amendment. An answer that is also technically correct is the 10th Amendment, because the 10th Amendment makes it where all powers not directly assigned to the federal government are given to the state governments. So that one can actually have 2 answers. So We'll scroll on down. So this one, it's kind of broad on it. I accepted a lot of different answers in general, kind of on this one, right? So what decade or what time period are each of these things known for? You can put down just a range of dates. So from this year specifically to this year specifically, right? You can put down the decade or decades that this is known for, right? Or you can say the title or the name of that historical era that lines up with this event. So there are a lot of different things that you can kind of do. And then the other thing is there's not 100% clean cut start and end dates to a lot of these things. So that year range gets a little murky. That's why a lot of these people use those historical eras, because historical eras overlap a little bit, right? And that just makes it easier to not have to give a definitive date, honestly. So Jazz Age. The Jazz Age was a big part of something called the Harlem Renaissance. If you guys remember talking about that, that'll be a little bit later on. We'll talk more about the Harlem Renaissance down here, right? So I won't go on too much, but you could put down Harlem Renaissance kind of as that one. The other thing, the time period that Harlem Renaissance was going on during was the Roaring 20s. So you could put down the Roaring 20s, the 1920s would be fine. And I kind of accept the Harlem Renaissance on that because it's sort of a historical period, but it's not really an era. The Harlem Renaissance doesn't have large enough of an impact to be considered a historical era. Dust Bowl. Well, when's the Dust Bowl happening, right? The Dust Bowl makes the historical era that it's part of much, much worse, right? The Dust Bowl, that very dry period where there's no rain coming down. We have the drought going on, one of the worst droughts in world history in the United States, right? Throughout the entire history of the United States, one of the worst droughts ever. And it makes the Great Depression much, much worse. If we remember our Great Depression, that's in the 1930s. Remember, Roaring 20s is the party, the Depression's the hangover, right? So if you can remember those two, they're right before and after each other. Roaring 20s, Great Depression's in the 1930s. You could also put 1930 to 1936 as the like specifics. Urbanization. Urbanization is kind of broad. If we remember what urbanization, things are becoming more urban, right? What are urban areas? Those are cities. So this is more and more cities, more people moving into cities. So the historical era that you can kind of do for this is both the Gilded Age and kind of the Roaring 20s. Okay, both of those honestly work, which also means the dates for it are kind of broad. Basically anything from 1880s to 1920s kind of works for this one, because we see a general movement of people from rural areas into urban areas during this period of time. And it's happening more and more often, more and more frequently. We see that kind of stuff happening. Okay. Baby boomers are born. Now, this is one that does have a 100% exact beginning and end date because they give beginning and end dates for generations. The baby boomers are a generation, right? Remember, World War II happens. We win it. All soldiers come home. We're doing well economically. People are happy that they won the war. They're happy to be alive. Everybody's in a good mood. They have a lot of babies. Things are going well, right? They feel like they can support a baby. They can deal with it, all those kinds of things. We get the baby boom right after the end of World War II. It can be from 1946 up to 1964. The other one, it's the prosperity of the 1950s, kind of works for the baby boom, right? That's the bulk of the time period is in the 50s, or at least it's the decade that takes up the largest portion of it. New millennium. Well, what's a millennium? A millennium is how many years? A millennium is 1,000 years. Do we talk about the year 1000 in this US history course? No, because the United States didn't exist in the year 1000. The continent did, right? But the country Certainly didn't. So we don't talk about the year 1000. Well, we've only had 2000 years that we know of, that we talk about, right, in modern history. So it's going to be the year 2000, right? Process of elimination. Manifest destiny. Manifest destiny. This one's extremely broad. Westward expansion is the time period, expanding out into the West. Remember, manifest destiny is the God-given right to expand from coast to coast of the United States, right? That you always see the imagery of that angel floating across the westward landscape, right? Is the symbol of manifest destiny. Frontiersmen going out and settling the land, taking the land, right? Out in the West. That can really honestly be anything from 1800 up to about like 1860, 1870. And really, honestly, and it's the entire 1800s. It can kind of go under manifest destiny. Honestly, just about the entire 1800s can go into manifest destiny. Most broad one out of this one. Growth beyond our borders. That's kind of a nice way of putting what going out and taking over a smaller, weaker country to extract resources for the benefit of the home country. What process am I describing there? That is the process of imperialism, right? That's the process of imperialism that we're getting involved in the expansionism era. We win the Spanish-American War in 1898, and then we start getting more and more involved in imperialism. We take Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, Cuba, Midway, the Samoan Islands, all of these things, right? All of them fall under imperialism or the era of expansionism, all right? Late 1800s, early 1900s, like 1890 to 1920s, you could kind of put down as the expansionism era. Industrialism. Now, this one's a little bit broad, industrialism, but we're really talking about is the second industrial revolution. First industrial revolution kind of starts in the, starts really before the United States as a country, right? And certainly before our class we pick up after the Civil War, right? So we're talking about the second industrial revolution. This one, you can think of industrialization happening along with urbanization. Late 1800s, early 1900s, right? Going from, well, mid 1800s kind of hits for industrialization, but you can think of like 1850 up to 1920 kind of hits, or Gilded Age. Gilded Age would also be fine to put down for industrialization. Affluent society. Well, what's affluent mean? Affluent normally means like wealthy, doing very well, kind of rich, right? Well, when is our best economic period that we talked about, right? One of the times that we do very, very well economically. When are people so happy about how the economy is doing, they're willing to have a bunch of kids? That is the 1950s. The affluent society is in the prosperity of the 1950s, or you could put post-war period, post-World War II period, but it's the 1950s is the affluent society. So we have the countercultural movement. This one's a little bit broad. There's a couple of things, again, that can be accepted on this one. 1960s, 1970s, you can also put down the civil rights movement. Works for the countercultural movement as a historical era. But yeah, 1960s, 1970s, right? We talk about that clash between the people with power and the people without power. We listened to the Creedence Clearwater song, I Ain't No Fortunate One, right? I'm not a senator's son. I'm not a millionaire's son. I'm not a military son. I'm not born with the power, right? I want to change that. I want to stop the people in power from setting the rules up in a way to keep power within their family or keep power within their class, right? The upper classes keeping the lower classes out of positions of power. That is the countercultural movement, or at least the idea behind it, kind of, right? The Red Scare. How many Red Scares do we have? 2 Red Scares. Both of them happen directly after World Wars, right? We have a Red Scare after both of our World Wars, World War I and World War II. So you can put 1920s and 1950s for our Red Scares, right? Going down, another one that I kind of accepted for this one was a Cold War period. Cold War, part of the Cold War is the Red Scare, so that's fair. Technically, we don't fully consider the second Red Scare to go all the way up until 1991, which is the ending of the that's the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union dissolves in 1991, right? But we're kind of in a Red Scare still. I mean, you definitely wouldn't want to go out on the streets in 1980 and say, I am a communist. Now, it wouldn't go as poorly for you as it would in the 1950s if you went out in the streets and said, I am a communist, but it still wouldn't go well, right? The war to end all wars, war to end all wars. Which world war is nicknamed the war to end all wars? That is the First World War. Even though the second one's worse, they already thought with the First World War, this is going to end the world. This is the war to end all wars. So that is World War I, right? World War I is the end to war to end all wars. 1914 to 1918. When's the United States get involved? 1917, 3 years in, barely in it for a year, right? All right, so the behemoth, the beast of this one, right? This is a big matching section. Now, what makes it a little bit easier on this matching section, you have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 15 terms over here, right? For each of these 15 terms in this first column, we have 3 total terms out of all of these over here. There will be 1 term in each column that matches with one of these. So the Harlem Renaissance, for example, there will be 1 thing out of the first 15 that matches the Harlem Renaissance. Then there will be a second thing out of 1 through 16 that matches with the Harlem Renaissance. And then there will be a third thing out of 31 through 45 that matches with the Harlem Renaissance. So I would go 4 Harlem Renaissance, 20 Harlem Renaissance, 37 Harlem Renaissance, right? I pick 1 out of each of them. So we're going to go through, we're going to do 15 by 15 and make sure we're not missing anything. We're not doubling up anywhere, making any mistakes, right? So let's go through, we'll go 1 by 1. Well, originated in Germany. That's kind of vague. A lot of things can originate in Germany. So let's look at these. Well, I know Harlem Renaissance is an American thing. Scopes trial happens in America. Expansionism. Now, the idea of expansionism, the idea of imperialism, where that originated, that's a hard thing to pin down. I mean, a lot of people would call the British the most imperialist nation, but I don't think they're going to ask me something that vague about imperialism for a US test. So I'll skip. Flight, that wasn't the Germans to do that first. The New Deal, that's definitely not a German thing. Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, not a German thing. Neither is the Gilded Age. Island hopping, Iran hostage. Red Scare. No. Assembly line, Dust Bowl, trench warfare, maybe trench warfare. Did the Germans start trench warfare, or is that generally just going on in World War I? That's a candidate. Maybe. I don't remember that off the top of my head. I'm not sure. So we'll think about 13, see if something else fits it better. The Zimmerman telegram. What was the Zimmerman telegram? It was that telegram the Germans sent to Mexico to try to get them to enter against the United States in World War I. So that has us Zimmerman telegram is number 1. Going to write down my 1 right next to 14. Now, I'm not going to be that mean to you guys. I'm not going to go down the whole list every time, but just giving an example of how you would go down this. So this one would be hard for you guys, right? You probably don't remember who these people are. What can we always do when we don't remember who somebody is? Yeah, copy. The first religious openly condemned the Shah's program of westernization. I remember hearing about that Shah. When were we talking about the Shah? The Shah of Iran, the Shah of Iran, right? The Shah of Iran came to the United States, and that really upset them. And that started the, where is it? Sorry, I know I read it. Iran hostage crisis, right? You guys like to Google everything, but you're bad at Googling. I gotta tell you, right? So you see a word you don't recognize, you don't know who that is. Don't Google the whole thing verbatim and just think, oh, this is going to get me the exact thing. Put in a keyword and then US history. It gets you better results. If you're going to Google everything, be good at it. Anyways, so number 9 is number 2. Number 2. Stalemate. What is a stalemate? Well, if we're not sure, a stalemate is when things kind of come to a halt, come to a stop, a standstill. So what out of these caused a standstill or a stop? Looking at them. All right, we talked about trench warfare. Remember, we're getting dug in. There's no movement. It slows what should have been a very quick war, what everybody thought at the outset would be a very short, quick war, into a 4-year-long, very slow war. Why do we only have trench warfare in World War I? Why don't we have trench warfare in World War II if it worked so well at slowing everyone down? Tanks or tank warfare ends trench warfare. Modernism versus traditionalism. Now, this is a toughie if you don't remember the unit. Remember, modernism, believing in modern ideas, newer things, cutting edge science and technology, possibly, right? Traditionalism, wanting to stick to the old way of doing things, believing in traditions, right? Well, there's one of these events that the core of it was all about traditionalism versus modernism. Remember our Scopes monkey trial. That was all about whether or not we could have laws banning the teaching of evolution in schools, right? Should we have these modern ideas like evolution in schools, or should we stick to traditional religious views, right? So Scopes trial is number 4. We got number 4 on the Scopes trial. Correction to the Depression. This should be an easy one. Which of these tries to solve the Great Depression? Which one of these tries to solve the Great Depression? And it's 5. 5 next to 5. That works out. That's nice, right? Rebirth of African American culture. Which one of these is specifically about African American culture? Well, you could have gotten a little bit of a hint earlier when I talked about the Jazz Age and said the Harlem Renaissance was part of the Jazz Age. If you remember, the Jazz Age was made up of mostly Black artists in Harlem, New York. And it wasn't just jazz, right? We had poets like Langston Hughes. We read that poem, I Too, right? Where he's talking about being stuck in the kitchen and wanting to eat at the table with everybody else. So it was kind of that symbolism for segregation and wanting equality and all of that, right? Mass production. Mass production. So Gilded Age is a good answer for mass production, right? We get industrialization. So I'm liking that one. Is there anything else that makes sense for mass production? Ooh, assembly line is also good for mass production, but it's good for Gilded Age. Well, let's look and see if there's another one that matches up with either of these, because both of those are good answers. Is there anything else that NASA's not mass production or Gilded Age? Nah, it doesn't really make sense. Well, fire that trapped workers. Well, there's bad working conditions in the Gilded Age. Oh, but if there's a fire that trapped workers, that's the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. So we can skip and do 6 right away. Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, that's definitely fire that trapped workers. So number 9 is going to go with number 6. That's easy. So I've got one we didn't even expect to get, right? Lack of crops, the House Un-American. Political machines definitely goes with Gilded Age. So if we only have one out of each of these rows, 12 is going to go with Gilded Age. Mass production is going to go with the assembly line. So our mass production number 7 will go with number 11. And then we have number 9, sorry, not number 9. Number 7 will be number 12, and number 6 will be number 9. Right. So political machines, remember, these are corrupt politics. When you hear political machines, you need to think corrupt politics. Well, the Gilded Age, we talk all about corruption and bad stuff going on, right? So that is our Gilded Age's corrupt politics. NASA created, and we have a push for math and science and education. This should be a slam dunk. This should be easy. What's NASA all about? Space, the space race, right? That's going to be NASA. So number 8 down here at 15. Then we already answered number 9 because we kind of got that one looking at these other ones. Lack of crops. Well, we only have so many left. Well, there's a lack of crops during the Great Depression. We already talked about that with we got the Dust Bowl again. We already talked about the Dust Bowl. We know the Dust Bowl is that drought. It kills the crops, all of that dust and dirt blowing through the air, eating through the crops, and eating through cattle and kind of everything in its path, right? So that one will go over. Lack of crops. Number 10 will go with number 12, number 12, the Dust Bowl. HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee. The House Un-American Activities Committee investigated a specific group of people for something, right? They were trying to figure out if somebody was a communist. If people were communists, you would be brought in front of the HUAC, or House Un-American Activities Committee. When are we looking for communists? The Red Scare, right? So that one, number 10, is number 11, HUAC. We already answered political machines. We have a Pacific campaign. When are we having a Pacific campaign? Our island hopping strategy, right? Because there's all those islands that we're trying to take from the Japanese in World War II. So that is our Pacific campaign, is the island hopping strategy. So island hopping, that is number 8. So 13 at number 8. Charles Lindbergh / the Spirit of Louisiana, or sorry, St. Louis. Spirit of St. Louis. Charles Lindbergh, if we don't remember, he's known as an American hero. He makes the first transatlantic flight. He flies from France, Paris, France, to New York. Transatlantic, going over the Atlantic Ocean, right? So that one's going to go with number 4, flight. So if we did everything right, number 3 and number 15 should go together. So let's see, does number 15 makes sense with 3. Spanish-American War definitely sounds like expansionism to me. That's when we start doing all our imperialism, taking those islands, right? So looks like we did our first set of 15 correctly. This should start going a little bit quicker, right? Oh, we already talked about the teaching of evolution, right? We said this Scopes trial is all about whether or not evolution should be taught in schools. So that one's an easy one. Number 16 goes with number 2. Employees of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. When are we talking about employees of an embassy in Tehran? Well, don't those embassy employees get taken hostage, maybe by Iranian college students that are angry about the United States supporting the Shah of Iran? That's going to be number 9. So number 17 is going to go with number 9 on there. The hostage crisis, taking those hostages from the embassy in Tehran. Jimmy Carter can't get them back for over 400 days. They don't return to the U.S. until the day of Ronald Reagan's inauguration. Well, we already talked about a fire in one of these. Fire escape collapses. I'm betting we aren't talking about 2 different, completely unrelated fires in this. That'd be a little bit weird. So when did we talk about the fire? The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, right? So the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, number 19 is or sorry, not number 19, number 18 is going to go with number 6. Number 18 with number 6. Remember, the fire starts because we're in the Gilded Age. There's no regulations. We don't have to have safety standards, all that and everything, right? The fire escape collapses. Over 100 women die in the fire, right? It's a horrible, horrible situation. Well, we already made this connection again. We're making connections. These things should be getting easier for us as we go through, right? We already talked about jazz music being part of the Harlem Renaissance, right? So number 1 is going to go with number 19. Number 1 and number 19 paired together. We get people like Louis Armstrong, the great jazz musician, Duke Ellington, another great jazz musician. All right. Then we have Okies. Okies. This is a slur, technically, for a specific type of people, right? A derogatory term to describe a specific group of people. This is a derogatory term given to people that fled Oklahoma because their farms were being destroyed. They were losing their crops. They weren't able to survive in their homes in Oklahoma. They went out to mostly California because of the Dust Bowl. Remember, we talked about how we have some of our connections between English class and history class when you guys read Of Mice and Men. George and Lenny could have been Okies. They're traveling up and down California looking for work, right? Trying to figure out what they can do. So now we have number 12 going with number 20. 10, 20. Funny. All right. Millions of shovels. When we talk about millions of shovels, what would you need millions of shovels to do? You'd need millions of shovels to dig all those trenches, right? It literally changed the landscape of Europe because of all of that trench warfare. Number 13, number 21. A lot of confused students on that one today with the millions of shovels. But remember, trench warfare slows it all down. We get things like trench foot. That's really gross, right? That land in between is no man's land where you're kind of dying instantly because we have those new machine guns that you can hunker down on either side of the trench and just tear through people, right? So that's our trench warfare being dug out with the millions of shovels. Witch hunts. Who got compared to hunting for witches? Remember, we talked about witch hunts being kind of this search for a certain kind of person that nobody likes, but you don't really have a lot of evidence, right? Especially in an actual witch hunt. Nobody's a real witch, so you definitely don't have real evidence. But in this one, you could technically be this thing. But during this period of time, a lot of people were accused of being a communist without any real cause or reason, right? That is our Red Scare period. You might be able to guess, oh, I have it highlighted even, who is known for these witch hunts. We can even skip ahead. We can get ourselves number 36 right here, because I'm just going to talk about him right now. Joseph McCarthy, McCarthyism and the witch hunts of the 1950s Red Scare, right? So we can put down next to, we'll finish up right away, Red Scare. We'll put down number 22 and number 36 next to Red Scare. Okay. Put people back to work. Put people back to work. When do we have the highest number of people out of work in US history? A 25% unemployment rate. That is at the height of the Great Depression. What tried to fix the Great Depression? The New Deal. Number 5, the New Deal. We're going to put down 23 next to that one. Cheaper goods, cheaper goods. Well, again, that's going to sound good for 2 of these, right? Because the Gilded Age, we do start getting cheaper goods because of our industrialization that happens. But if we remember, we also have the assembly line on here. And we know the assembly line makes it much more efficient and much faster to make goods, which made them much cheaper. So I have 2 good answers again. What do? Let's take a look at some of these other ones, see if they match up for either of those other ones. Well, we're lucky. It's actually the very next one. Robber barons and or captains of industry or titans of industry. When did we have our debate over John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie possibly being captains of industry or robber barons? That was during our Gilded Age, because remember, we have that massive gap in income. We have that huge wealth inequality. We have the first millionaires in American history. Well, while we also have people working 12 and 16-hour days for barely any pay, no workers' comp if you get injured, no protections, any of that stuff, right? So people thought, they do all this philanthropy. Maybe they're captains of industry. They're great people. They've made all this money. Or maybe they're stealing from these workers that are producing all of those goods and the wealth that they're putting through these grueling work conditions, right? So Gilded Age, number 25. So we're going to put 25 next to 7. And then that answers our question on 24. That does indeed go with number 11. There we go. Sputnik. What's Sputnik kick off? Come on, guys. You got to know what Sputnik kicks off. Sputnik kicks off the space race. The space race. Sputnik, the first satellite ever launched by the Soviets, causes what we already put down, number 8, the creation of NASA and the focus on math and science, right? USS Maine explodes. We've talked a bunch about the USS Maine. We've mentioned it a ton of times, right? The USS Maine explodes and it causes us to enter what war? The Spanish-American War. Well, once we enter the Spanish-American War, what do we start doing a whole lot more of? Imperialism. We get Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, all of those territories out, the Philippines out of the Spanish-American War. We continue to go on and take some more. That's going to be expansionism. Number 3, USS Maine. 28 goes with number 3. Then we have suggestion of alliance. That's very vague. When do we have a suggestion of an alliance? Well, we only have 2 left. What are our 2 that are left? Number 4, that is flight Suggestion of a military, or do we only have 4 left, or do we have more left than 4? Did I miss flight? I feel like I missed flight. We'll come back to that in just a second. Sorry, but because I know what this one is. Oh, ha 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 ha. I did miss 26. I jumped past it. Now makes sense. I was like, what happened? I know something went wrong here. Anyway, suggestion of alliance. We'll do that first since I started it. Suggestion of alliance. The suggestion of alliance is the Zimmerman telegram, right? Germany tries to get Mexico to join an alliance with them. So we're going to put that down 29 next to 14. Honestly, even if I'd have read shows American courage, that's so vague. I don't know. That could be anything. Could be the courage of Americans, right? That's so vague that I have no idea what it goes with. I would skip it like I skip a test question that I'm not sure on and come back to later, especially since I know there's one of these that matches everything. And if I look at number 30, I do know which one of these would be a military alliance, a military strategy. The military strategy could have been trench warfare, but definitely millions of shovels makes more sense for trench warfare. So I'm not going to put that there. Military strategy would be our island hopping campaign, number 8. Number 8 is going to get number 30, which then helps us by process of elimination. Sometimes you got to eliminate the bad answers first or figure everything else out first to get these vague, weird ones, right? Showed courage of Americans. I don't know, man. That does fit flight, but that, again, could fit literally anything. It's so vague, right? So process of elimination, it gets us 26 goes with 4 flight. Okay. My brain knew I'd want to skip it. That's why I missed it. Right. That's why. Led to rights of workers. Now, this was a tricky one for people today. I noticed these two had some overlap. The Gilded Age and the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. People argued that both of these led to an increase of workers' rights, right? Because of the tragedy of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, people realize we need to get some workers' rights. We need some regulations and all that, right? People realize because of all of the horrible things going on with working conditions during the Gilded Age in general, we needed to increase working rights. So let's see if there's something that matches one of those two other ones, right? Let's do our process of elimination. Migration to California. We talked about which one that is already. We'll come back to that in a second. Lack of child labor legislation. Well, that definitely hits the Gilded Age spot on. So I would go with the Gilded Age on number 33. So 7 is 33. And then we now know we can comfortably put led to rights of workers on number 6. So 31 on 6. Now let's come back to migration to California. We already gave this answer. When did a lot of people have to move to California because their farms were ruined? That was with the Dust Bowl, number 12, right? So that one's going to be 32. Next to the Dust Bowl, we said that George and Lenny from Of Mice and Men that were traveling around California during the Great Depression looking for work, right? They were migrating to California because of the Dust Bowl, right? Glenn Curtis Naval Aviation. Well, we hear the word aviation in there, right? So we can put it in flight possibly, but naval aviation. Well, we've talked about something with the Navy quite a bit, right? Our island hopping strategy requires the Navy. So I don't know. Should I put Glenn Curtis Aviation in flight or in island hopping? Let's look around. Let's find out. Push for science and math education. Well, we already said that one. I'm just reading that. I'm going to put that directly onto number 15, the space race, since I should know that right off the bat with everything that we've talked about. So I'll put 35 next to 15. McCarthyism, we also already answered that one. Henry Ford invented. He didn't invent flight. He's not the island hopping guy. Hit them where they ain't. That's a little confusing. I'm not sure. Imposed economic sanctions on Iran. Well, this one also should be an easy one. When's the only time we talk about Iran? Oh, yeah, we talked about Iran with the Iran hostage crisis. So just putting those two words together, I might, put 39 next to 9. So remember, we're upset with Iran. We're going to put sanctions on them, trying to get our hostages back. Sanctions are like economic punishments. We have a lot of sanctions on Russia right now, right? Because of the war in Ukraine. So, Darrow versus Bryan, that doesn't sound familiar. Bombardment from new military technology, no. Book of Influence of Sea Power, no. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, no. Texas Return to Mexico, no. Cotton Club. Well, we only had 2 that were really confusing, that we didn't know, that we weren't sure on. Maybe those 2 go with those 2, right? If there are 2 on a test that you're like, I don't know where these go, or like, I don't know what's going on with this answer, and process of elimination has gotten me down to this point, maybe those are the 2 you should hold on to. So I'll just give you them, honestly, because the whole point of that was sometimes answers just don't make sense and you don't necessarily know. I'm going to be completely honest with you, because hit them where they ain't, and also Glenn Curtis Naval Aviation. Neither of those are super clear. However, Glenn Curtis Naval Aviation, the word aviation is going to go with flight. So 34 can go with 4. That's flight. We can put that one down there. Sorry, 1 second. I'm going to pause. Okay, sorry, I need to grab water. My throat is starting to hurt. But we're doing hit them where they ain't. Also, hit them where they ain't is actually going to go with island hopping. Technically, it's about taking the islands that we can and then moving. As soon as I stop trying to, I'm going to. There we go. Okay, sorry. Taking the island by island, taking it where we can for refueling stations, and then moving to where they are. Island hopping strategy. Island hopping number 8 is number 38. So let's go back after our big derail. Sorry. Math and science, we answered that. McCarthyism, we answered that. Invented by Henry Ford. I hope we remember this one, and this one's an easy one for us. Remember, Henry Ford invented this to build the Model T. It's what made the Model T much cheaper and easier to afford. It is the assembly line. Number 11 is number 37. U.S. imposed economic sanctions on Iran. We already answered that one. Darrow and Bryan, Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow are the prosecuting and defense attorneys in the Scopes trial. Remember, William Jennings Bryan was also the presidential candidate that we talked about for the Populist Party, and he argued the case against John T. Scopes in the Scopes trial. He was a traditionalist, while Clarence Darrow was a modernist. All right, almost done with this section. And this is the longest section by far, guys, for this one. We'll almost be done. Constant bombardment from new military technology. You're going to be constantly bombarded by the shelling, the machine gun fire, some bombing in the trenches. You end up with that term. Remember, the artillery shells go off and explode. You feel those vibrations coming through and you end up in shock. We call that shell shock during the time, PTSD in the modern day, right? Where was trench warfare? Trench warfare 13. 13 is 41, right? Yeah, 41. Book of Influence of Sea Power. Book Influence of Sea Power. Now, this is an obscure one. We talked about it though. We went over how you needed a strong navy and this influence of the power of the sea to be able to take new territories and extract resources from them, becoming a dominant world power in our era of expansionism or imperialism. This book is especially influential on good old TR, Theodore Roosevelt, or Teddy Roosevelt, our big imperialist president. Remember, he has the big stick foreign policy. He believes in he believes in imperialism and creating the Great White Fleet, that big navy and everything, right? Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC. Remember, this prevents bank runs that were going on. Your money in the bank is insured by the federal government up to, at the time, it was $2,500. It's actually up to, I think, funny enough, $250,000 nowadays. So you're fine. Average Americans more than fine. Your money in the bank's insured, right? Most people don't have that money just sitting in a bank account. So 43 goes with the New Deal, right? The thing to solve the bank runs that was causing the Great Depression. 43, New Deal. Texas returned to Mexico. That was the promise in the Zimmerman telegram, right? 14, Texas promised to Mexico. And then does the Cotton Club match up with our last one left? Oh, thankfully, yes, it does. 45, going with number one. The Cotton Club was one of the biggest jazz clubs during the Harlem Renaissance. We finished it. We got all 45 of them, guys. We got through it. The rest of this will be much, much quicker, I promise. We'll go through a lot quicker, especially since we've kind of gone through the background of a lot of these things, right? The more background we've already gone over, the less I have to go over as we answer these. So identify the following civil rights statements as pertaining to women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, American Indians, or all of them. So are sit-in or freedom rides. Well, who'd we talk about mostly doing the sit-ins and freedom rides? That was mostly in the campaign to end segregation, mostly fought by African Americans, right? So sit-ins, that's going to be A. Phyllis Schlafly. We talked about Phyllis Schlafly. She's our good old pick me girl that we jokingly called her, right? She doesn't believe in the ERA, or Equal Rights Amendment, that we see down here. We can answer two of these at the same time. Phyllis Schlafly believed that we shouldn't be pushing for full gender equality because it was going to cause some problems, right? Women didn't need to have all of these advancements in feminism and all of these things. It was going to cause more problems than good. So she's technically attached to women. The Equal Rights Amendment outlawed discrimination on the basis of sex in any way, not just when it came to voting, but at all. So we can put W next to Phyllis Schlafly and a W next to the Equal Rights Amendment. Now, we're actually going to talk another one about women is Title IX. Title IX. So we didn't talk about Title IX very much in my class. It was very briefly mentioned, but essentially Title IX gets passed and it has a lot of requirements on equal treatment of men and women in college, that there has to be an equal treatment of men and women in college. The big thing that it comes into play with is sports, that sports have to be equally funded between men and women's programs. It also sets up a lot of like protocols and things that have to go on for possible like disputes between men and women. Unfortunately, one of those is for sexual assault cases, is a big part of Title IX also. Betty Ferdinand, we're on a roll. We can put another W next to Betty Ferdinand, right? We talked about Betty Ferdinand generally with the women's rights movement. She's pushing We can also put Betty Ferdinand down. Voting Rights Act, we talked about Voting Rights Act more with the general civil rights movement. Now, the Voting Rights Act does benefit all of these groups. I would put down Voting Rights Act benefiting all of these groups. However, there was the biggest push for this one from the African American community that had the largest struggle being able to gain that right to vote, specifically in the South. So you could put down AA or you can put down all. I think both of those work on that one, right? Hector Garcia. Hector Garcia, remember, he was the veteran of World War II that came home, and he found out about the fact that there was a Mexican-American soldier who had died in the war. His body was sent home, and then a funeral home in Texas denied burial rights to them. They said they would not hold their funeral service and they wouldn't bury their son there because it was a segregated cemetery, right? And that really struck a chord with a lot of people, right? This guy fought and died for his country, and he wasn't allowed to be buried where his family wanted to bury him. How wrong does that feel? Right. So that becomes a big civil rights moment for the Mexican American movement in the civil rights movement. Hector Garcia kind of becomes an advocate talking about that event, and he becomes the first Mexican American to sit on the civil rights board to kind of advocate for Mexican American people. Cesar Chavez. We talked about Cesar Chavez with the migrant workers movement in mostly in California, but in kind of the southwestern portion of the United States. That's where a lot of our agricultural workers are, or migrant workers that Cesar Chavez helped fight for. As you might be able to guess from his name, he is Hispanic, right? So that one's going to go in the Mexican American movement for Cesar Chavez. Our Little Rock Nine, when did we talk about the Little Rock Nine? Little Rock Nine has to do with the 9 young children that wanted to go to Little Rock High School. What was unique about them being at Little Rock High School? Well, Little Rock High School was segregated initially, right? But these 9 students were African American. These were 9 young Black students that wanted to go to Little Rock High School. And a Supreme Court case that had been decided 3 years earlier said that they had to be allowed to, because separate is inherently unequal. That Brown versus the Board of Education decision says the Little Rock Nine have to be allowed to go to school. Then we have the Governor Orville Faubus not allowing them to go in, right? We have the big standoff between Orville Faubus and President Eisenhower, where Eisenhower sends in 1,000 troops of the 101st Air Force. And they end up forcing them to accept the 9 children to be able to go to school, right? Dolores Huerta. Dolores Huerta was part of, again, the agricultural workers movement, right? Her and Cesar Chavez worked hand in hand, right? They worked together to help that farmers movement. They had the boycotts that were very successful, some strikes, hunger strikes that also went on. They would march through California. Her and Cesar Chavez worked very closely together and both had some major accomplishments in that agricultural workers movement, right? And one of the parts of that agricultural movement was the United Farm Workers, right? The United Farm Workers are also part of that. So Dolores Huerta and the United Farm Workers can both go under the Mexican American movement. Well, AIM was the American Indian movement. I wonder what title we can put on the American Indian movement. Maybe American Indians, right? Might make sense there. So remember, the American Indian movement was looking for people to respect the perspective of American Indians, to recognize them as equals in society, and kind of get some better rights for the reservation system. some better treatment for the reservation system. Collective bargaining. So collective bargaining is another term for unionization. This is going to mostly go with the farm workers movement. You can put down Mexican American on it. Technically, collective bargaining does go with all of them because there are different boycotts that go on with the Montgomery bus boycott, with the farm workers boycott, with a lot of different organized actions that go on, but collective bargaining most closely associated with Mexican American movement, but could be all. Capture of Alcatraz. The capture of Alcatraz happens with the American Indian movement. They hold Alcatraz in a demonstration against the United States government. It's native land. They're holding it. And it's kind of this big protest that takes place in the American Indian movement. The Chicano mural movement. The Chicano mural movement is part of, if you know what Chicano means, this should be pretty easy, the Mexican American movement, right? Chicano is kind of the, sorry, I'm going to take a drink of water. Sorry, Chicano refers to a cultural or ethnic background that a lot of Mexican Americans identify with, right? The Chicano mural movement is kind of this empowerment movement that goes on in that community. So that's going to be Mexican American. Martin Luther King Jr. Put down the correct answer. Affirmative action could be technically all of them. The affirmative action could be all of them. Remember, this is the executive order signed by Lyndon B. Johnson. The executive order signed by Lyndon B. Johnson that kind of says that, hey, there's been an unfair playing field for such a long time going against people of color that to get equality, you kind of need to give them an advantage for a little while, right? That just saying that we're going to have a level playing field from here on isn't going to do much if when we started this race, we start the race, the gun goes off, one of the guys starts taking off running and the other guy has his legs tied together. Well, if that goes on for 20, 30 seconds, and then you say, all right, I'll cut the rope that has your legs tied together, right? That guy is not going to catch up to the one that's been running for 30 seconds unless you do something to help him out, right? He still had that 30-second disadvantage having his legs tied together. So they're saying with the affirmative action program, we'll help give you that boost. We'll give you a ride on the golf cart to help you catch up to that guy, and then we'll make it an equal race, right? Great growers boycott. We talked about this already, right? Who's the agricultural workers that were boycotting some of the farms that weren't giving proper working rights and all of that, right? That is going to be the Mexican American movement. 19th Amendment. Who gets the right to vote with the 19th Amendment? Women get the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. That's an easy one. 24th Amendment gets rid of the poll tax. That helps everybody. That's all, right? Poll tax just made it where you had to pay to be able to vote. Getting rid of that helps everybody. All right. Match the presidential program. Match the presidential program. Let's look at it. Always read the description first and then look for the answer. Easier to read one sentence and then read through 8 different little titles than it is to read one title and 8 sentences, right? Read the sentence first. Domestic program to bring about immediate economic relief from the Great Depression. Well, that's an easy one. That's a slam dunk. We can just put A with 1, the New Deal. I think we've talked enough about the New Deal. We should know that one. Dollar diplomacy. Sorry, I went against exactly what I said to do. U.S. policy issued in 1899 stating that foreign nations must allow free trade in China. Ooh, we haven't talked about this one in a while. So we want free trade in China, right? We're opening China to trade. We want to have open participation in Chinese markets, right? That is going to be the open door policy. Number 8 is B, the open door policy. We have the Boxer Rebellion as a result of the open door policy, where China's like, hey, I don't like all these foreign countries in here trying to do all this stuff and everything. Tell us what we have to do, right? And they lose the Boxer Rebellion handily. We say, nope, we get access to your markets. We're going to buy your stuff. We're going to sell stuff to you. Too bad. All right. Approach to foreign policy that focused on encouraging and protecting U.S. trade and investment in Latin America by supporting them financially. So the big part of that is Latin America and financially, right? Which one of these sounds like it has to do with financial stuff? Well, there's dollar in the name of one of them, right? So if we're talking about financial stuff and we see dollar diplomacy, odds are the correct answer is going to be the one that says dollar in it, right? We got to make these connections when we're looking at multiple choice tests, guys. Sometimes it really is that easy when you don't know the answer to a question. It's just looking at, well, they're talking about financial stuff. I see dollar. Don't have that thought of, well, they wouldn't make it that easy. They're not outright trying to trick you. They're not making a test to be mean. If something seems obviously right, pick it. It is probably right. But dollar diplomacy is the intervention in Latin America, supporting them by financially to try and get some support out of Latin America, get some U.S. friendliness in the area. U.S. foreign policy after World War II of promising to support countries in Europe to stop the spread of communism by providing military assistance, political and economic assistance for democratic nations. Now, the big part of this one is the military assistance, because two of these plans, the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine, are very, very similar to each other. But there is one key difference, that the Truman Doctrine offers military aid after World War II, okay? We don't offer any military aid with the Marshall Plan. Both of them are a part of the policy of containment, containing communism, not allowing it to spread, part of the Cold War, all of that, right? Both of them are put in office by Harry Truman, but the Truman Doctrine is the one that offers military aid, okay? End of World War I, a plan for peace. We've talked about this one. The president during World War I, we got all those W's right, World War I, Woodrow Wilson, we get some alliteration there, are 14 points. The biggest part of that 14-point plan for peace was the League of Nations, right? It's the attempt at the United Nations, but it fails because we don't join. Because Wilson wants it, but Congress doesn't, right? We're isolationists during that time. Congress doesn't want it. So E goes with 4. F, reform program focused on regulating big business, protecting workers and consumers, preserving the environment. Which one has to do with preserving the environment and helping workers? Well, we said the worst period in U.S. history for workers was the Gilded Age. Which era is a response to the Gilded Age? The Progressive Era. Well, if we're responding to workers' rights, it's progressivism. Oh, we also see Roosevelt on that list. Who's the big environmentalist out of this era, this period of time? Remember, it is Roosevelt. He starts the plan for the National Park Service, and Wilson puts that National Park Service into action. So you'll see stuff about the national parks, mostly with Roosevelt, because he started the plan for it. But so that puts progressivism with, progressivism with F. the reform program. Now, this might sound confusing because I just talked about Roosevelt, but if you notice, there's another Roosevelt one here. Theodore Roosevelt came up with the plan with a strong arm approach to foreign policy and affairs that emphasizes diplomacy backed by force. Peace through strength is Ronald Reagan's version of this, right? Theodore Roosevelt calls it the big stick policy. It's basically mess around, find out, right? We're not going to do anything. We won't start a fight, but we'll end the fight, right? We have the Great White Fleet. We have that big Navy to flex our muscles and show off how powerful of a country we are and what we can do if we have to, if you mess with us, right? So that is big stick policy is G. So if we did this right, H should match up with the Marshall Plan. Well, to aid the economic recovery of Europe after World War II by offering certain European countries financial assistance. That is the Marshall Plan, H, Marshall Plan. It's also to prevent communism, right? If countries have the choice between starving to death and communism, they'll pick communism, not starving to death, right? So don't give them that choice. Let's give them some money so they don't have to make that choice. So these are more presidential programs. It was just broken into two to make it a little easier on you. So these are programs after World War II. Technically, Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan are both after World War II. I didn't make this one, but whatever, nitpicking. So programs after World War II. After the 9/11 attacks, this is done to loosen restrictions on intelligence gathering by U.S. security and law enforcement agencies. Remember, we talked about this. This is where the FBI watching me on the other side of my screen memes come from, right? The my FBI agent watching me like the government gets some more freedom to spy on us with the U.S. Patriot Act of 2001. The other big tip off there is the 9/11 attacks happened in what year? The Patriot Act is passed in what year? Make those connections. You got to look for those things when you're taking the test. They will give you the answer sometimes like that. Required banks to make credit available in poor communities, preventing the decay of lower income neighborhoods in inner cities. Now, my class, we didn't talk about this program directly. However, I think with this description and the name of the program, we should be able to put it together, okay? The Great Society sounds like a pretty good match right now. If you do remember what the Great Society was, that does sound like something that might have happened in the Great Society, but let's look on War on Terror, Detente, Community Reinvestment Act, right? Require banks to credit in poor communities, preventing the decay of lower income neighborhoods in inner cities. These sound like we're investing into communities is kind of the description that's being made here, right? So I would put B with 12. Even if I didn't know what this program was at all or what this description was at all, they sound alike. Put them together, right? You're going to get questions that you have no idea what the answer is, and you kind of just got to read through it and say, well, that sounds right. That sounds like those two things are related, right? Relaxation. Sorry. Relaxation of Cold War tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. This is a release of tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. A release of tensions. There's that fancy French word. This is one of our two French words we have to know. The release of tensions is détente or détente as it's spelled, right? The French putting in all those extra letters on their words. But détente policy, the release of tension. So down. Purpose is to deter and punish terrorist acts in the US and around the world in response to 9/11. Well, we hear that word terrorist in there. Let's look on here. There's a war on terror. I wonder if those two things are related to each other. If the war on terror is about deterring terrorism, right? We talked about, we have the war on terror. George Bush Jr. declares a war on terror in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. Okay, so we're going to put war on terror with D with war on terror right there. Supply side economics: increased interest rates, reduced taxes, and regulation on businesses. We said supply side economics has a couple of names, right? We could call supply side economics trickle down economics. We could also call supply side economics Reaganomics, right? Reagan liking those tax cuts, right? Liking to reduce regulation on businesses, all of that fun stuff, right? Reaganomics, supply side economics mean the exact same thing, right? We also have supply side economics during the 1920s with our string of those 3 Republican presidents, right? We have Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover in the 1920s that all also like supply side economics. Johnson's plan, well, we got the answer, LBJ, Johnson, but Johnson's plan focused on social welfare improvements, including a war on poverty that is in our great society. Remember, with things like Medicare, Medicaid, welfare programs being expanded, Head Start. Some of you guys might have used Head Start to go to pre-K, right? Those are all parts of the great society under Lyndon B. Johnson. That's part of the new left, right? That we talked about in the countercultural movement and all of that stuff. Foreign policy supporting military strength for the purpose of creating peaceful international relations to protect the peace of the U.S. must have a strong missile defense program. Well, again, the name of this kind of answers it, kind of describes this, right? We must be strong to have peace, maybe peace through strength is the plan, to be strong and have peace. Maybe those things connect to each other, right? So G, peace through strength, right? Reagan likes to build up our military. We talked a lot about how with the combination of Reaganomics and some of his peace through strength stuff, we get those crazy high deficits that we get that kind of become a trend for the Republican presidents after Reagan. We get the crazy high deficit with Reagan, with H.W. Bush, and with George W. Bush, mostly because of that military spending, that idea of peace through strength. H, response to recession of the late 2000s. Well, there's only one answer left, but response to the recession of the late 2000s, commonly called stimulus or bailout package. Primary job was to immediately save and create jobs. That is the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act under Obama in 2008, right? Remember, the Great Recession starts in 2008 to 2009. Obama enters office in 2009. He feels like, economy's slipping. I got to do something about it. Let's pass the Economic Recovery and Reinvestment Act, try to get it back on track. Last 2 sections, guys. We're going, I'm if you can tell, I'm trying to go quick. Okay, I really am trying to go quick for us here. All right. All right. Actually, I'm going to pause real quick. I need to take a bathroom break. Sorry. We could tell we were getting tired, needed a little boost in morale. Hopped up to say hi. Yes. The good boy. Good boy. Yes. Best dog. That'll be on the test. Got to get right. Right in. Bean, B-E-A-N. You'll fail if you don't. Okay. Oh, let's go through. All right. This one's a little tough. I'll be honest. This one's hard on the Supreme Court cases. We'll try our best on it. I'm probably going to kind of just give answers for some of them because some of them are tough. Some of them are easier. Like I said, we'll see how it goes as we go through. But let's give it a solid first attempt. This first one should be easy. The case was argued by Thurgood Marshall and required integration of public schools. Which Supreme Court case desegregated all schools in the United States? That is Brown versus the Board of Education, B. Number one is B. Remember, Thurgood Marshall argues in front of the Supreme Court for Brown versus the Board of Education, and then later becomes a member of the Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall, the first Black Supreme Court justice in U.S. history, right? So, Supreme Court case ruled that racial segregation was constitutional in the state of Texas. So that is a little bit different, right? Putting in Supreme Court case that ruled racial segregation was constitutional in the state of Texas specifically. So that is what makes this one sorry guys, gang. All the talking just really making it easy to end up with the coughing fits. Sorry. Okay. Which Supreme Court case said that segregation was legal, right? Which Supreme Court case says segregation is equal, creates separate but equal? That one is, I'm over it already. You should know it. Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson is the one that makes it legal for segregation. Texas case that was influential in Brown versus Board of Education stated that prohibiting integrated education was unconstitutional, established what is today's TSU Law School. So remember, we talked about this one. This one led to Brown versus Board of Education. This was at the University of Austin in Texas. Sweat wanted to go to the law school at University of Texas in Austin, was denied, and that ended up being found unconstitutional, even though they tried to make another law school specifically for him to go to. But they said, that is not equal because it doesn't have the prestige, it doesn't have the teachers, it's not in the same location as the University of Texas Austin. So it starts to show some of those issues in separate but equal when it comes to things like education, especially. Segregation of Mexican American children was legal in Texas if based on language deficiency. So this one was in one of our Supreme Court case charts, right? If you actually did that assignment, if you were one of the 5 people that got that assignment done and turned in, right? A few more than that. But if you were one of the people that did that, this might be an easier one. But that one was Delgado versus Bastrop. Basically, they said that racial segregation wasn't legal, but segregation on the base of language deficiency was. Now, the issue with this was once they said language deficiency would register you for being segregated, a lot of times they would just go into schools and say, oh, this kid's Hispanic, they speak Spanish. And then they put them in the segregated school, even if that kid didn't speak Spanish at all. And then now that poor kid who doesn't speak Spanish is being put, 1, into a segregated school, which is oftentimes not as well maintained, and 2, specifically designed to be taught in Spanish there. And that kid doesn't speak Spanish, right? So it could lead to a lot of problems. California case that ruled that segregation of Mexican American students in public schools was a violation of the law. This one actually helps lead to the Brown decision and expands upon the Brown decision, the Brown decision expands upon it. This court case is Mendez is this one. Again, another one that was in our Supreme Court case chart. It's like we give you those assignments because some of those cases are important and you need to know them for this STAAR test, right? I don't just like to throw busy work at you for no reason. So going on to the next one, court decided that a jury needed to be composed without regard, decided, I think that's, sorry, the phrasing on that's weird. Court decided that a jury be composed without regard to ethnicity. It's just saying it in a weird way, but that ethnicity wasn't taken into account when creating a jury. Sorry, the phrasing on that threw me off, especially with, how long we've been reading and going through all of these, right? But that's Hernandez. Hernandez versus Texas is that one. Hernandez versus Texas is there. Sorry, I have dog hair on my face after petting Bean. 7, amendment cases in school ruled that state law requiring children of Amish religion to attend school until the age of 16 violated their freedom of religion. We did talk about this one in notes. It was also on the modern court cases assignment. This one was Wisconsin versus Yoder. There's a Wisconsin law. Yoder sounds a little bit like it's Amish, right? Wisconsin versus Yoder. Ruled that students can use symbolic speech at school as long as it does not cause a disruption. We already talked about this case earlier with that First Amendment right to wear the armbands in school protesting the Vietnam War. That's what they're referencing right there, right? That is Tinker versus Des Moines. Tinker versus Des Moines. Limited free speech, anything that is said that presents a clear and present danger is no longer protected under the Constitution. This is Schneck versus the U.S. We have not talked about this one in a while. This one was way, way back that we talked about it, but we talked about how it basically determined that if you were creating a clear and present danger, yelling fire in a crowded theater is the one that everyone always goes to, but also, saying, hey, beat that guy up. You should go beat up that guy. That guy looks like you should punch him in the face, right? You're creating a danger for that person by doing that, or something that would cause a stampede that would run people over. That's not protected by the First Amendment. Just because you're free to say what you want doesn't mean you're free to cause harm to people, right? Direct harm to people. Number 10, school financing. The decision required changes in school finance to increase funding for students in poorer school districts. This one is, sorry, my phone went off. Where is it? Did I scroll past it? Oh, I'm blind. Sorry. White versus registrar, J right here. Determines that you need to give equal payment to different districts. Sorry, I was having a hard time finding it in the list. I don't remember them based off the letters. I have to look for the names. So this case required single member districts. Sorry. See, no, it wasn't that one. I'm going to pause because I swear to God that this one is White versus registrar. I might be getting those mixed up in my head. I think this one's White versus registrar. Sorry, actually is 11. Cases that required single member districts to be drawn so that legal groups, i.e. Mexican Americans, African Americans, could elect their own representatives to office. Let's look at these again real quick. Yeah, this one, sorry, I mixed up the two in my head for a second. 10 is Edgewood ISD versus Kirby. 11 is White versus registrar. I think I was thinking about going through them in order and mixed them up. Sorry. So this one, basically, when we describe that whole process of what's called gerrymandering, was 11, was White versus registrar. 12 relates to the 14th Amendment in that there was not enough time to change how a recount was done for a presidential election. We talked about this one. This is the only one that talks about a presidential election that we've gone through. It is with the election of George W. Bush. Remember, there's all those problems in Florida. I think there should be a recount because there were between 500 votes is making the difference, right? And that is in Bush versus Gore, George H.W. Bush versus Al Gore. Supreme Court upheld Executive Order 9066 that denied an entire race some of their constitutional rights and held that the need to protect against espionage/sabotage outweighed the individual's right. We've talked about this one already. Korematsu versus the United States. Uh-oh, my computer just gave me the low battery notification. I thought it was plugged in. I'm just going to pause here. Sorry. Last one. We only have one section left. We're plugged in. Got myself a nice Topo Chico. Finish off. Help with some of that raspiness, right? Last section. We made it. Last section. We're on it. Another one of those historical eras. Again, these are my favorite out of these. I think that they're really helpful. I do think as much of a pain as it is, the 45 matching is really helpful. Connecting these events with these different kind of things. And then also these historical eras. Both of these are helpful sections to help get us through. So we have, again, the progressive era, expansionism, New Deal, Cold War, prosperity of the 1950s, and the civil rights movement. So all things we should be familiar with at this point, guys. As we're going through these, we should be remembering more and more. I'm going to be explaining less and less, giving less context to it, which I'm sure will make both all of you and myself much happier to finish quickly. So environmental conservation. We get a lot of our environmental conservation out of the progressive era. People like Teddy Roosevelt, the national parks, sorry, that Topo Chico, get those national parks service and everything, right? And everything out of that. So we get the conservation effort in the progressive era. Public works programs. When do we need to get a lot of people to work? What is basically made up of a bunch of massive jobs programs like the WPA, PWA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. We get the Mount Rushmore, the Hoover Dam. We get a lot of different things built by the New Deal and its public works programs. Voting Rights Act of 1965 should be an easy one on here. That is our civil rights movement, right? We get some more voting rights. We ban practices like those literacy tests that we talked about. That's the grandfather clause that was in the last one of these ones, that you were grandfathered out of literacy tests. Well, we get rid of the grandfather clause because we get rid of literacy tests in general. Berlin airlift starts this era, right? This is the first flare up, the first major tension of the Cold War, right? We have the Berlin airlift happen because Stalin gets real mad at the United States and the other allied nations because they combine their sections of Germany into West Germany. And then we get East Germany with the Soviets. And then we get East and West Berlin. Stalin puts up the blockade. It's kind of that game of chicken we talked about, right? Who's going to be the first to start a war? Are we going to forcibly break the blockade? No, we're not. We're going to outsmart them. We're going to fly in all the supplies that we need to be flown in to Berlin. Growth of agricultural business. Now, this can kind of go in a couple of different ones, with it being specifically agricultural business. That's talking about corporate farming. The growth of agricultural business and corporate farming comes a lot out of the prosperity of the 1950s, where we get massive farms and all of that, right? We try to get some agricultural growth of agricultural business with the New Deal. We get some programs for farmers, right? But the 1950s, we're going to see the expansion of corporate farming and business agriculture. Increase of women's rights. What rights is in the name. Civil rights movement, the growth of women's rights. You can also kind of put this in the progressive era because the progressive era is also when we get the 19th Amendment. We get the 19th Amendment in 1920, right? The 19th Amendment gets passed. So you could put progressive era, you can put civil rights movement. Both of those fit. Antitrust laws, again, we're working against those monopolies, right? Trusts, we said, were basically the same thing as monopolies. They acted like a monopoly. It was all those businesses coming together to fix prices and agree on them as a trust. Antitrust laws, breaking them up. The progressive era is responding to the issues of the Gilded Age. Third of the way through, telling you and myself, right? Equality, that's a general statement. Equality, again, could kind of go into the progressive era. Equality for workers, right? Workers' rights in the progressive era. But what do you think it really is going to be? Civil rights. Civil rights movement wants equality. McCarthyism. When does Senator McCarthy become a big deal? We already talked about McCarthyism, the witch hunts, finding communists in the Cold War era. Large Navy is built up. What do we need a large Navy for? We need a large Navy to be able to take islands so that we can extract resources out of them to benefit the mainland United States. What is that process of extracting resources from a smaller, less powerful country to benefit the larger mother country? That is imperialism. That is part of the age of expansionism. Securities and Exchange Commission. The Securities and Exchange Commission regulates the stock market, tries to prevent us from having another massive stock market crash because of things like over speculation, wildly saying that stocks are worth more than they really are. Things like are buying on margin, being able to buy stocks with just a loan, right? Or things like those pump and dump schemes where you pump up the price of a stock and then sell it off in mass and leave somebody else holding the bag. We compared those pump and dump schemes to a lot of the cryptocurrency stuff that you guys are seeing going on, right? We're going to go to the moon. And then all of a sudden they sell all that stuff off and it crashes and it's worth like 0.00001 cent. Same thing used to happen with stocks, right? A lot of the stuff that you see with cryptocurrency is very similar to the things that we see with very shady stock market practices. Increase in college enrollment. Well, what makes college enrollment so much easier to get? It is the GI Bill that's paying for all of those veterans to go to college, right? Well, when do we have the GI Bill get passed? That's in the post-World War II era or the era of prosperity, right? All this increased college enrollment also helps the economy, creates an era of prosperity in the 1950s. Annexation of Hawaii. What does it mean to annex something? Well, Texas was annexed by the United States after it became independent, right? It means to take that thing, right? If we're taking Hawaii for our own, if Stanford B. Dole is overthrowing the Kingdom of Hawaii and making it part of the United States, that sounds a whole lot like expanding the United States or expansionism and imperialism. The Panama Canal. Who pushes for the Panama Canal to be made? We kind of want, oh gosh, I'm blanking on who owned it before Panama, because we encourage Panama to have a revolution against, I'm so sorry, guys. I'm sorry. We're 3 hours in. I'm tired. It's 10 o'clock at night. I'm not remembering it off the top of my head, but we encourage Panama to have a revolution, right? Theodore Roosevelt, our imperialist president, pushes Panama into a revolution so we can build out the Panama Canal. We can increase our world trade. We can have our Navy go between the East and West Coast much more easily without having to go all the way around South America, right? The Panama Canal is part of expansionism. Colombia. Anyways. High federal deficit or debt. Well, if we're in a ton of debt, we have a lot of problems going on. If there's a ton of debt going on, right? We might end up in an economic depression because of the debt, and we need to solve that depression with the New Deal. Civil Rights Act. It's called the Civil Rights Act. What do you think? Women return to the household. Well, when were women out working? Because all the men were gone. All the men were gone in the war, right? In World War II. So we have Rosie the Riveter and all the women working those industrial jobs. After that ends, we get the era of prosperity, and a lot of women have to return to the home. Fiat currency. This is also going to go with the, technically it can go with the New Deal. We start to move towards a fiat currency. Remember, fiat currency means we're no longer on the gold standard. There's not gold backing our money. It just has value because the government says it has value, which honestly, if you think about it, gold is the exact same thing. Why does gold have value? Because we say it does, because it's a rare mineral, or rare metal, right? Okay, there's a lot of rare metals that we don't necessarily use as a backing as currency, right? But anyways, that's a tangent. Fiat currency can go in New Deal. It can kind of go in prosperity of the 1950s. Nixon fully puts us on a fiat currency, but FDR starts to try to put us on a fiat currency. 17th Amendment, direct election of U.S. senators. That is part of the progressive movement. The populists are the first to push for it. But remember, the populists become part of the Progressive Party. So 17th Amendment is going to be progressive era. We're done. Woo! You're still here. I don't know how. We got part 3. It'll be up over the weekend for you to go through. Hope to God somebody's using these and they're helpful for somebody, because boy, am I going a little bit insane.